Now that all three sections of the bookcase have been built and installed, it's time to get to the trim work. So let's head out to the building and get started on that. The top piece of trim is going to be 141 1/4 inches long by 2 1/4. And I'm going to be using this board here, which is 12 foot long, and it's a 1 by 8. So I need to cut this down real quick to the 2 1/4, and then I'll cut it to length once that's been done. Now I'm measuring this out to 141 1/4 inches. To give this trim board a little bit more decorative look, I'm using the router to put a little curve over on here, and it just kind of breaks up that straight edge. Of course, I'm wearing a mask and ear protection, eye protection. Now I've got some 320 grit sandpaper. I'm just going to hit the top and side of the board, which is really going to be the only thing that's showing. This will just make sure it has a nice smooth finish on it. Now you'll notice up here in the corner, the current trim on the house comes down about 2 1/4 inch and then sticks out 1.5 inches. I need to work around that, so I'm just going to be cutting a little bit off here on the corner of my board to allow for that. My board is a little bit long to fit into the space it needs to, so I'm going to come back about 1/4 inch here, and then I'm going to move 1 inch and about 1/2 right here, and that should be enough. So if I go from this point here and cut down to that point, I should be good to go. The nails that I'm going to use are just a little bit big, so I'm going to pre-drill some holes in my trim board to prevent this from cracking. That's the last thing I want to happen after all this work. Now I didn't sink these nails all the way in just yet because I want to use a nail punch here so I can drive them in without marring up the wood with my hammer. And the top trim board is installed. I believe that looks really good. Next step is going to be installing the bottom trim, and then the pieces that go down will be next. And then lastly will be the little trim pieces that cover this. So the bottom is very similar to the top, so I'm going to cut that real quick and get it installed without you, and then we will move on to the next step. Now that I have the top and bottom trim pieces installed, it's time to get the 4 combining sections installed. What I mean by combining, I mean the 2 sections here and then the 2 on the wall. So let me measure the height that I need between these. I need 92.5 inches. And then I also need to have them by 2 inches in this direction. I have a 1 by 12 that I need to pull that 92.5 inches out of. So I'm going to line this up here. Find the 92.5 and then make my mark. Then I'm going to use my saw to cut this board. Next I'm going to rip 4 2-inch pieces. Just like with the top and bottom trim, I'm going to use the router with a roundover bit to add a nice decorative edge, but this time I'm going to do both the left and right sides. Notice on these boards I also gave the decorative edge over the corner here to make it look nice. Now comes the fun part of sanding. Now that I have the trim board cut and sanded, it's time to get it installed. This has two different sides of this plywood, and so I'm just going to pick one to be the side that I nail into. So I'm going to get this set into place, and then I'm going to, I suppose, use this outside piece and just going to drill a hole here as my pilot hole. And that way I can go ahead and get a nail started here. Moving down about 2 feet, I'm going to sink the next one in here. Now I stopped a little short again so that I can once more use my nail punch to drive this the rest of the way in. I'm going to be using the remainder of this 12-foot board as the rest of the trim here. And I have my table saw set to 1 inch so that it will rip these pieces to the size that is needed. And I'm going to go ahead and just rip down the entirety of this board and then cut it to length as I need with those 1 inch strips. So I'm going to make a couple of different 1 inch strips out of this piece now. Out of that 12-foot board, I have cut a 92.5 inch board that's the 1 inch across. I'm going to use the router to put the round over bit on this and sand it down, and that will make the trim work for the middle of the 3 shelves. And after that, we'll move down to the actual shelves themselves. These tall 1 inch pieces are going to go here in the middle of each section of Bookcase to cover the supports that were built. Now there's going to be 3 of these in total. And the next step is going to be putting the trim on each one of these shelves. And there's a bunch of them. So you've already seen all the steps required to make these 1 inch pieces. I'm just going to be making smaller sections of that to put in here. So I'm going to get one of them installed with you coming along, and then after that I will get the rest of these finished, and then after the whole case is done I will bring you back and we'll look at the finished product. Let's get this one done just for the fun of it here. I've got 19 3/4 inch. I measured this shelf a little bit closer, and it's actually 19 inches and 5/8. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that out real quick and go ahead and get this cut down. I'm really excited about the next portion of this build because I'm going to be making the rolling library ladder. Should be quite fun to build something new like that. Alright, I'm going to get this cut, routed, and installed. I have this piece of trim finished up now. I'm going to go ahead and put it right here in the middle, and then as before I'm going to put a couple of pre-drill screws in here. Do that on both sides. Add a couple of my nails. I know a lot of these steps are repetitive, but it is very similar work here. I have a lot of these trim pieces to make before this is finished, so I'm going to get out here in the shop and finish this up, and as soon as I have it all installed, I'll bring you back for the final look. Now that the trim is done on the bookcase, it's time to get it painted. My wife Ashley would like some high gloss paint on here to finish it up, so we're going to get on that real quick, and then I will show you the completed bookcase. Except for a little bit more paint, the bookcase is done. This has been quite an adventure, taking several weeks, but I'm glad to see that it is finally finished. Now there are a few little mistakes that I've made along the way. I'd like to point them out. If you look close, you can see there is a difference in shelf height here and here. This piece was built, and when I cut the bottom, it was just a little bit lower than the rest of them. And then whenever I pieced these together, some of them did great and some did not do as well. You can see this pretty sizable gap here. And that's because the shelves here stuck out just a little bit. If I had a good planer, I could have pulled that down, but I didn't. So, and you can see up top here was a good fit, but this piece right here just came out some. And that could have been remedied whenever I was assembling by putting more towards the back, but hindsight's 20/20. Also, it may have been good to find a way to hide these brackets, but since there's going to be a lot of books on these shelves, I believe it's going to be concealed just fine. Now I only put 2 brackets per shelving unit, and I think that's going to be sufficient to keep this against the wall, but you could definitely add more if you felt the need. I'm fairly new to woodworking, and this was quite an undertaking, but the wife's happy, and that means I'm happy. I'm sure there are plenty of tricks and tips that could have helped to make this an even easier build, but I think it turned out pretty good. The next step in this full wall bookcase build is the rolling library ladder. It's the first time I've worked with oak, a hardwood, and should be quite exciting. As always, thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.